Let's have a few minutes of silence. Let the mind calm a little more, and then we'll generate our motivation. So let's cultivate our motivation. So there's verses in Shantideva's text and also in the Guru Puja that compare working for only our own welfare with working for the benefit of others, and the detriment of thinking only of ourselves and putting others off to the side, sometimes not even seeing them as living beings with feelings, but maybe just as people to use to meet our needs and wants. And the verses then go on to say that that self-centered thought is the source of our misery and leads us only to really bad states of being, while the thought that cherishes others is the source of all goodness. So I don't know about you, but I've heard that verse, those verses many times. I've recited them myself every day. But every once in a while, they hit me. Because when we're so familiar with our self-centeredness, we often just don't see it. And we defend it as taking care of ourselves. But if we really look in our own lives as and do a really good life review, however long that takes, and do it many, many times, and track what happens when we follow the self-centeredness versus when we've followed the thought that cherishes others, we can see a very definite difference in the results that happen even in this life, let alone the causes for results that we'll experience in future lives and on the path. So it's good to reflect on these verses and let them hit us right in the heart. And when they do, then it becomes much easier to release the self-centeredness and really let our heart of love and compassion come to the forefront. So take a moment and do that now. So we'll have that as our motivation for sharing the Dharma today. Okay, so that was talking a little bit about the disadvantages of the self-centered mind. But there's also the self-grasping mind. Okay, so the self-centered mind prevents bodhicitta. The self-grasping mind prevents the wisdom realizing emptiness. It's hard sometimes to really see, well, how does the self-grasping mind harm me? Why is it the root of samsara? Okay, I understand how when I'm selfish, that's not good. I can understand my anger and my jealousy and belligerence and competition are not so good. My greed isn't so good. But, you know, in my daily life, I mean, I just see myself as I always see myself and see people as I always see them. And this is how we exist. So how does that act as the cause of suffering? Any of you ever wonder this? Yeah? Because we hear, oh, self-grasping, the root of samsara. Yeah. But do we really understand it in our own lives? How it causes problems? No? So I had an interesting experience yesterday listening to Geshe Tupke's teachings, which many of you have. And that morning I had received a message from a friend of mine telling me about some decisions they had made. And I understood why they made those decisions. It made sense to me looking from their viewpoint. But on the other hand, I didn't think they really had good reasons behind them from my viewpoint. Okay? And as Geshe-la was teaching, because he was, going in the Vajrasutta, cutting off all of our grasping towards everything, I had, that person's decisions and Geshe-la's teachings. And then it became much clearer how my friend's decisions were underlain by self-grasping ignorance. Yeah, it wasn't just, attachment or anger. One of the usual things that support. Yeah, well, that are easy to see, but here to see how the decisions, which made sense in her perspective, were really underlain by seeing themselves and the situation and every element in it as a really concrete and existing as some concrete entity with its own nature that was totally true from its own side, existed without any imputation from our side, And so it was interesting, Of course, I could always see it in somebody else's life before seeing it in my life. That's always so much easier, isn't it? We know everybody else's anger and their attachment, but we can't see it in ourselves, But it made me kind of resolve to start looking more inside and trying to catch the self-grasping before it, or at least see it before it sparked all the other afflictions, which are easier to see. Okay? Because it's without seeing the self-grasping ignorance as our enemy, then we won't try and remove it. We won't do anything about it, if you think the boogeyman is your friend, you're not going to chase him out. You're going to invite him for tea. So, yeah, just something to think about. Because we're talking about searching for the self. And why are we talking about that? Yeah. We can all recite, oh yes, self-grasping ignorance, the root of samsara. We have to realize emptiness. What's next? But to really understand that is, I think, takes some more. Okay, so in our very short series about searching for the self, we've touched on a few different subjects, and I thought on today, the last one, we would talk about the object of negation, okay? So the importance of locating what the object of negation is, and then what it is, and how do we differentiate it from the valid sense of self. Okay, so I'll do as I've done in the past. I'll read a little bit and comment on it, what His Holiness has said here. Okay, so for those of you who have the book, it's on page 164, talking about the importance of correctly identifying the object of negation. So the object of negation is what we grasp onto as existing, even though it doesn't exist. Okay? So what the whole thing revolves around is identifying what doesn't exist and then proving to ourselves that it doesn't exist. Yeah. Now that might seem quite easy, except, since beginning this time, we've accepted what doesn't exist as who we are. And so to suddenly go, oh, well, maybe I'm not that, and maybe the world isn't what I think it is really rather shocking. Yeah. And we don't like shock, do we? We want predictability and security and like that. Okay, so His Holiness says, correctly identifying the object of negation by reasoning is essential for meditation on emptiness to be effective. So Shantideva says, without having identified the object of negation that is imputed, the absence of that object cannot be apprehended. But it's funny, we have to identify something that doesn't exist and then refute it. That's kind of hard to do, isn't it? Okay. So the word emptiness in Buddhism has a very, very different meaning than it does in ordinary language. Okay. In Buddhism, it is the lack of a certain mode of existence that we believe exists, but when we really stop and check and analyze, we discover that mode of existence is false. Things do not exist in that way. Okay, so the first step is to get an idea of what inherent existence would look like if it existed. Okay, so they often use the example of a thief, but I like using the example of a boogeyman, because for me a boogeyman, when you're a kid, is much more dangerous than a thief. A thief maybe takes your marbles, but a boogeyman, you don't know what a boogeyman is going to do. Okay? So for those of you who had the privilege of not knowing about boogeymen when you were little, a boogeyman is some horrible creature that is under your bed. Yeah. And when you go to sleep, yeah, if you're not a good kid, that boogeyman could come out. And you don't know what the boogeyman's going to do, but it's not going to be good. Okay? So as a kid, you're terrified of that boogeyman. Yeah. And adults told you it existed, so you're a kid, you believe the adults. Yeah, they're supposed to know what they're talking about. How long did it take us to realize as kids that adults don't have a clue what's going on in the world? Yeah. Okay. So you have to know what the boogeyman looks like so that if he tries to come out, you can bat him, you know, and say, get out of here. Yeah. You don't want to confuse the boogeyman and the tooth fairy. You know, the tooth fairy is good. They give you money when you lose your teeth. Yeah? The boogeyman doesn't. Yeah. Can we tell the difference between them? Mm-hmm. So, you have to have an image of the boogeyman so that you can identify him and then protect yourself against him and say, go away. Okay? So, that's why we have to identify what inherent existence would look like if it existed. The boogeyman doesn't exist, but we have to have an idea of what he would look like in order to know that he doesn't exist. Okay? So Tsongkhapa himself initially had difficulty in identifying the subtlest object of negation. Yeah. So if Tsongkhapa had problems, what about us? You know? So it's going to take a while to really do that. Okay? But in one of his early texts, the Golden Rosary, it seemed like he believed that since nothing can be found when analyzed with reasoning, then nothing exists conventionally. In other words, he had fallen to the nihilistic view. He thought that sages assert dependent arising and conventionalities only when talking to others. Yeah, that is, the discussion of conventionalities is done for the sake of others, not because one is asserting their existence. Yeah. In other words, we talk about conventionalities and dependent arising because it makes people feel good, but it's not actually true. We don't actually believe it, but we talk about it for their benefit. Okay. Now, of course, we can see, having studied his final view, that at a certain point he realized that initial view was not correct. Yeah, that he had not identified correctly the object of negation. Okay. So he asked questions to his good buddy, Manjushri. Wouldn't you like to have Manjushri as your good friend? Wow. That would be so cool. Yeah, there wouldn't be so much confusion in our minds. Yeah. So here's Manjushri on the book cover. Yeah, he's our friend. Okay, so in the three principal aspects of the path, which is in the next volume, volume 8, yeah, which is called, what's it called? What's volume 8? Realizing the profound view. Yeah. I can't even remember the titles of the books that I helped to write. Okay, so in that text, he emphasized that if we think emptiness is an independent, absolute truth, We realize emptiness. There it is. Emptiness is somewhere here, the absolute, irrefutable truth that is there. Yeah? If we see it like that, such that dependent arising and emptiness are incompatible, okay? Because if we see emptiness, that's why as an absolute truth, that's why I don't like translating the term as absolute truth. It really gives the wrong idea. Ultimate truth is much better. It means the ultimate mode of existing. But absolute gives you the idea that it's out there and you're stuck in it, you know? Okay. So then that makes understanding dependent arising and cause and effect and parts and so on very difficult. So in the three principal aspects, he said, as long as dependent arising and emptiness are seen as alternating realities, you know, then we don't, and something is contradictory. You know, sometimes we can see them as empty, sometimes as dependent arising, but those two don't seem to fit together. Okay? So as long as that happens, we haven't gotten it. We don't have the correct view because we haven't even identified correctly what to refute. Okay. So here's another quote from Tsongkhapa. This one's from the Lamrim Chenmo. Just as, for example, to ascertain that a certain person is not here, the boogeyman. Okay, to ascertain that the boogeyman is not here, you must know the person who is not here. Yeah, do you have an image of the boogeyman? Yeah. My boogeyman is kind of, really nasty looking, disgruntled, unhappy, complaining, and out to tear anything apart because he's so cynical. Okay, so just as, for example, to ascertain that a certain person is not here, you must know the person who is not here. So in order to ascertain the meaning of selflessness and the lack of inherent nature, you must also identify well that self and nature that do not exist. This is because if the conceptual appearance, the mental image, of that which is to be negated does not appear well, then also the negative of that will not be unmistakably ascertained. So the negative is emptiness, showing, that inherent existence doesn't exist. Okay, then there's another quote that I really like here. This runs from Chankya Ropé Dorje. And, so so he was a sage from Eastern Tibet, and he said that some dialecticians, other people who use logic, who are skilled in philosophical debate, insist on consistency and are obsessed with giving a rational account of everything. They claim to be intelligent scholars and good practitioners, but they leave intact the solidity of what they perceive in front of them. So, how we just perceive things as inherently existent, they leave that totally intact. They don't question that. They think the object of negation is something external that can be identified without questioning the way the I appears in the everyday function of the ignorant mind. So they're thinking that something that is not functioning in our daily life, isn't the usual way we see things, is what needs to be negated. Okay? It seems as if they are negating something with horns that is completely unrelated to their own apprehension of I. Yeah? So they're not seeing in their own minds, oh, it's my self-grasping. It's the I that needs to be negated is, somebody else's idea that's being pushed on me, or something else. Okay, but it's not coming from me. So this is because they haven't correctly identified the inherent existence that appears to them in their daily perceptions and thoughts as being the object of negation. So here's the verse that he said. Among today's thinkers, there seem to be some caught in the web of words, self-substantial, ontologically real, and so on. This sounds like us. We learn a lot of these fancy words when you study emptiness for a while. It is not self-instituting. It doesn't set itself up. It doesn't exist by its own side. Yeah, it doesn't exist by its own power. We know all the words. Yeah? And then we see that's what we're negating. Do we have any idea what those words refer to? It's something, out there. Okay. So they only invent monsters with horns to negate, leaving intact our vivid, coarse, apparent world. Yeah. He also made some statement about a hat. Geshe-la, do you remember? Yeah, something like people, when they're negating inherent existence, they think of it as a hat that they just have to take off. Do you remember that quote at all?
I think what Venerable just recited is that same quotation where lang lang ling ling shi rang sor shane, by keeping intact the inherently existing thing. Gokyu Rajan shi chöbar nangde. They seem to be looking for someone with horns.
Horns?
Yeah,
Okay.
with horns on their head.
Okay, so it's not a hat, it's
Yeah,
horns.
it's horns. Whereas in the face of the emptiness, there doesn't seem to be that lang lang ling ling, that inherent thing that you are keeping intact.
Yeah.
If you dwell much, deliberate much on this and pursue on this way, there is the possibility that the old mother emptiness is going to run away.
Yeah. Yeah. Chunky wrote a beautiful poem. What's the name of it? I can't remember the name. What?
Yeah. Mother.
Recognizing the mother,
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah. Yes, Thakur Amangunzi. Songs of emptiness, recognizing the mother.
Yeah.
So he employs the whole crew of family, father, mother, uncle, son, like that, in really making this point clear.
Yeah. Yeah. He told the whole story of self-grasping and refuting it as if all these things were family relatives, So that's very nice. Okay, so I'm not going through all the points here, but one thing that is important in identifying the object of negation is what is not the object of negation, knowing that. Okay, so in the 400, Aryadeva said, if things existed inherently, what good is it to perceive emptiness? Seeing by way of conception binds. This is refuted here. Okay, so Aryadeva was Nagarjuna's disciple and a great debater. Okay, so the first two lines, if things existed inherently, what good is it to perceive emptiness? Warn that if phenomena existed inherently, inherent existence would be the nature of phenomena, and things couldn't be refuted. If things existed inherently, there's no emptiness. If the boogeyman were real, there's no way to prove he's not real. Okay? And here, conception refers to the grasping at inherent existence. Some people translate Daksin as conception of self, and others as self-grasping or grasping self. I think conception of self, although it is a conceptual mind, according to the definition, conceptual mind, its way of being conceptual is not the way we usually think of conceptual, because we usually think of conceptual as thinking, and it's not that we sit here and think all day. I inherently exist, the camera inherently exists, you inherently exist. That it's not that gross kind of conception, but it's a subtle grasping that rears its head a lot during the day, okay, that is not so gross. So it's hard to find. So of the three types of phenomena, evident phenomena that we can detect with our senses, slightly obscure phenomena that we initially know through reasoning, and very obscure phenomena, those that we know through, it's a reasoning kind of authority, why to trust the scriptures. So ordinary beings cannot initially directly apprehend slightly obscure phenomena with their sense consciousnesses. Okay, so we're not negating what we see and what we hear and what we smell and taste and touch. Okay? Yeah, our true existence appears to our sense consciousnesses, but our sense consciousnesses do not grasp those things as truly existent. So there's a difference between how things appear and how we hold them. Okay? So, when I look at the thermos, it appears truly existent. Yeah. When it's just sitting there and a thermos, I'm not really grasping it as true existence. If somebody comes up here and takes it when I'm thirsty, then I grasp its true existence, because, that is mine and I want it. Okay. But the slightly obscure phenomena, like inherent existence, is something that's initially realized by reasoning, okay? So only after correctly ascertaining the emptiness of true existence conceptually can then repeated meditation on it until the conceptual appearance of emptiness is worn away. Only through that kind of meditation can ordinary beings realize emptiness directly and become Aryas. Okay? If all conceptual consciousnesses, even inferences that are the correct conceptions of emptiness, if all of these were erroneous, then we couldn't use language, we couldn't use any conceptual consciousnesses at all. And in that case, how would we even learn about emptiness? Because language is, is conceptual, isn't it? Yeah. And if we say that all concepts are bad, then we're throwing out the very concepts that would help us identify what we need to negate. Okay, so this is important because there was, it comes to this whole thing we were discussing in the past about those who are absolutist and grasp inherent existence and those who have a nihilistic tendency and say nothing exists. Okay, so if you say conceptions are all bad, you're really going to the nihilistic thing. We couldn't even have class. Okay, if emptiness meant, it's just all conceptions are bad, then we wouldn't even be sitting here, thinking about it, discussing it. There would be no reason to write a book because all conceptions are bad. Yeah, you just totally erase conceptions from your mind and dwell in that non-conceptual mind. Okay, blank-minded meditation. Okay, so there's always a tendency for people to go in that direction. And there are actual schools, that assert that. And that was the topic of the big debate in Tibet in the 8th century. Okay, which, by the way, the conclusion of that debate was that Hashang, the Chinese abbot, was all wrong because he threw out all conceptions whatsoever. And Kamalashila, the Indian sage, was right because he said we needed conceptions to understand. And so because of that, in Tibet, since then, they chose the Indian Kamalashila's way of presenting emptiness. But there was a tendency to say, all these Chinese, they think of blank-minded meditation. They're doing it all wrong, And there's that idea between many Tibetan sages today and how they look when they meet Chinese monks. That idea is wrong. Yeah. In New York, some years ago, it was quite a number of years ago, Master Shenyan from Dharma Drum, he invited His Holiness to give some talks in New York. And it was beautiful talks, yeah. And at the end, the last session, was His Holiness and Venerable Shenyan in dialogue with each other. And this topic came up. Yeah. And His Holiness, said, is it true, that in Chan meditation, you just get rid of all conceptions and focus on a blank mind? And Venerable Shenyan said, no. Yeah. And His Holiness says, is it true that you think people, can suddenly get enlightened like that? There's sudden enlightenment without accumulating merit and things like that, because that goes along with this old misconception of Chan. And Venerable Shenyan said, no, of course they need to create merit. Okay. So it was a really interesting session together. And having gotten to know myself, having gotten to know some Chinese practitioners and some of Venerable Shenyan's disciples, as well as other Chinese Chan practitioners, when we talk about emptiness, it's very clear. It's not all about making the mind blank. Okay, so I think that's one misconception that's been passed down from one generation to the other that we can discard. Okay. The next one to discard is that the Chinese look at the Tibetan practitioners and say they practice magic. Okay. And the reason for that is very interesting. All these wrong conceptions that the different traditions have about each other. There's some basis, that is then misconstrued and you come out with this wrong conception. Yeah. So there's some way where you can understand that somebody got this. Yeah. So why do some why did some Chinese think that the Tibetans do magic? Because in previous centuries, some of the Tibetan lamas went to live in Beijing. They were there by the request of the Chinese emperors, and the emperors asked them to do pujas. Okay, and when you do pujas, the Tibetans were doing stuff in Tibetan. The Chinese didn't understand it. Tibetan pujas, there's a lot going on. There's these bells and that bell and the small drum and the big drum and the cymbals. There's these symbols and then there's these symbols. Then there's the short version of the long horn and the longer version of the long horn. And there's holy water, and there's strings, and there's long life pills, and there's, like lots of stuff, external stuff, okay? And people tend to have the idea that, and I see this today, both in the East and the West, that the less you understand, the more blessing you're getting. Of course, people don't say that. They don't think they think that, but that's kind of what it amounts to, okay? So while the Tibetans are doing all their things and pouring water and waving feathers and, using the brocade, and then you have this hat and you have that hat and you have this hat and, multicolored hats and, there's all this stuff going on. And then sometimes the puja does bring the result for which the benefactor asked. So then it looks like magic. The Tibetans did some kind of magic with all their, and the benefactors got what they wanted. Okay? So, of course, that's not true. Yeah. But you can see how they would think that way. And I had the experience when I lived in Singapore. I know I'm getting off track, but misconceptions are important to identify. When I lived in Singapore, occasionally people would come up and ask me what their lucky number was so that they can buy the lottery ticket with that number. And one time I told one man, he stopped me in the park when I was taking a walk, and he said, "Tell me my lucky number." And I said, "I'm sorry, I have no idea what it is." And he said, "But you've got to, you're in the Tibetan tradition. Tell me my lucky number." So I was a failure. No, I couldn't do that. Yeah. But, yeah, that's what these robes, meant to him. Okay. So here's another quote from, so the conceptual consciousness is holding, okay, let me start the beginning of the paragraph here. The object of negation being discussed here is not wrong objects learned through the study of faulty philosophies. Okay? So it's not faulty philosophies such as thinking, there's directionally partless particles that compose everything. The scientists are still looking for those. Apperception, a mind being able to see itself, a permanent creator, or a God who manages and controls the universe, some kind of primal substance, the idea of one substance from which everything in the universe is made, the idea of one universal mind, and we're all chips off the old block, as they say, and we dissolve into the one universal mind. So there's all sorts of views like that. Okay, those are conceptual consciousnesses, those views, but they are not they are not conceptions or grasping at inherent existence. They're other views, okay? And Geshe Topke loves negating these. We've studied chapter 2 of Pramnavartika with him, and then we've been going through his book on the dependent arising and the Rice Seedling Sutra. He loves those views, and he goes into them when he's teaching those sections again and again. And sometimes when you're listening, you're going, how can people believe such weird things? But then you look what people believe nowadays, and they're just as weird. So we have conspiracy theories about, political conspiracy theories, but we have religious conspiracy theories too, ideas that people have that are just way off. In fact, I just read today that in Kenya, they are discovering some mass graves out in the countryside with the disciples of some new Christian sect in Kenya who were told that if they starve themselves, they will go to heaven. So these people starve themselves. They're finding, the graves out in the countryside. So it's something that is like, you go, who would believe it? Well, some people did believe it. Yeah. And some people believed when Marjorie Taylor Greene said that the fires in California were caused by Jews in spacecraft and satellites, I don't know, sending something to start the fires in California. Some people believe that. So, we may go, who would ever believe that? Well, people do. And some of us, when we really apply reasoning and logic, we see that what we were taught as children were these kind of off-the-wall views that really, when you think about it, applying reasoning, there's no way to validate these things. Okay? So, one of them, for example, that is quite prevalent in our culture is the idea of a permanent creator. Yeah? Some creator who does not change, who was not created themselves, but creates everything else. Well, in the Buddhist viewpoint, if you say something is permanent, it means that it is not produced. It did not arise through causes and conditions. Something that is not produced by causes and conditions cannot change. Everything that we look around that changes, the thermos, the bell, the table, my body, your body, the carpet, the sound system, everything is changing all the time. Okay. Why? Because it's produced by causes and conditions, and the causes and conditions change. Nothing remains for a single moment. Okay. But in our culture, the idea of a permanent creator is, people accept that. There's a creator who himself was not created. Well, from a viewpoint, if you're a Buddhist viewpoint, if, you create other things, it means you yourself were created by causes and conditions, which means you can't be permanent. Okay? So these kind of views were prevalent in ancient India, and they're prevalent now. Yeah. When I first started studying and, hearing about some of these views that were around in ancient India, I remember thinking, who in their right mind would believe that? Yeah. like the Samkhya view or something like that. And then I realized, they're not so different from what a lot of people today believe. Yeah. Okay, so here's Tsongkhapa's conclusion about the object of negation. Okay, therefore, the awarenesses whose mode of apprehension, how they apprehend the object, is to be eradicated by reasoning are only conceptual mental consciousnesses, and moreover are the two graspings of the self of persons and the self of phenomena, or those conceptual consciousnesses that mistakenly superimpose further attributes on objects imputed by those two graspings of self. Okay, so that's, the mind that grasps at the wrong way of existing that we need to overcome. How do we overcome it? By proving that the object it grasps, that it apprehends, does not exist. Okay, now the thing comes is, how often do we have this grasping at true existence? Is it there all day, all night? Do we ever have any valid kind of minds? Yeah, and this was a big discussion, I think, in Tibet, too. How do you assert any kind of reliable consciousnesses if, they're all grasping true existence? Okay. Well, not all of them are grasping true existence. True existence appears to all the consciousnesses of sentient beings, except Arya's meditative equipoise, directly, non-conceptually perceiving emptiness. But all of the rest of our consciousnesses, true existence appears to them. We don't grasp the true existence of all those things. Okay. An example is when you look in the mirror, you see the face, but we don't grasp that face as being a real face. Maybe when you're a baby you do, but after you learn, there I am in the middle, and in the mirror. In fact, some people get so mad at themselves, they hit the mirror because they think, they don't like themselves, so they hit the mirror because they're seeing themselves there. Okay, so it's things appear truly existent, but we don't grasp all of them as existing. Okay, so here's how to determine the valid sense of I. And this is important because if we can't do it, then we're going to negate too much, and we run the risk of negating also the valid sense of I, not just the inherently existent I. Okay, so before refuting the inherent existence of the I, it is important to differentiate the valid sense of I and the view of a personal identity, or jigta, is the Tibetan, and their objects. This will clarify how the view of a personal identity reifies the valid I by superimposing inherent existence on it. And it will also help us discern the object of negation and differentiate it from the valid I. Okay, so the psychophysical aggregates are the basis of designation of the self, right? Yeah? So they are the basis of our innate sense of self. So the notion I, comes about as a result of some experience. It arises in relation to one of our aggregates. So it doesn't arise just somewhere in space. For example, we say, I'm sick when our stomach hurts. Okay, or we say I'm full when our stomach is full. We say I'm happy when the feeling aggregate has a pleasant feeling. We say I'm unhappy if the feeling aggregate has an unpleasant feeling. We say I'm clever and I know what's going on when we, in reference to the discrimination, the aggregate of discrimination that can, identify things. We say I'm angry or I have compassion in relationship to the fourth aggregate, of miscellaneous factors. And then we say I'm thinking in dependence on the mental consciousness, and I'm hearing in dependent on the auditory consciousness. So it depends on what the primary consciousness is as well. Okay? So in short, the thought I arises only in relation to our body and mind. We don't look at the thermos. We don't look at the tissue thing and say, I. Yeah. If you do, you know what happens? Don't try it. Yeah. Okay. So at these times, when we just are identifying something, I feel this, I think that, we're not thinking, I am my body, or I am my feelings, or I am the one who's thinking. Okay? Rather, there's just a sense of a conventionally existent I. Yeah? That I, when you say, I'm going to walk down to the mailbox, that I is not a big deal. It's just, I'm going to walk down to the mailbox. You're saying it in reference to the body because the body's walking down, not your mind. Okay? And that I, there's not a strong feeling of I. Yeah. If somebody says, no, you aren't, you're staying here, then how you grasp the I is going to change. But otherwise, I'm walking to the mailbox, no big deal. Okay? We're not thinking I am my body or I'm different from my body or whatever. So that feeling is just a conventionally existent I. So that's a valid mind apprehending the mere I. That is, the I that is merely designated in dependence on the aggregates. Okay? So whenever we say mere I, we're referring to the I that exists by being merely designated in dependence on the aggregates. That I appears inherently existent to the valid I apprehending mind. However, that mind does not grasp that I to exist inherently. So self-grasping arises after this. So something may happen in our environment that triggers it, or internally we may have a troubling memory, or a memory of something we really like and want, desire. Yeah, you're daydreaming some kind of, exquisite palace or something. So at that time, the appearance of an inherently existent I becomes more vivid. Okay? So when there's more emotion in your mind, how you perceive yourself and other things changes. That's when the grasping comes in. So there, the I seems to have its own essence and exist under its own power, independent of all other factors. So just think of how you feel when, somebody tells you no. You're about to do something you want to do. Yeah, and you're looking forward to it, and then there's some obstacle and somebody says no. Yeah. We all know that feeling here, living at the Abbey. all the time. No, 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 no. Of course, we don't say no to other people. They just say it to us. But that's exactly how that feeling of, wait, he's telling me no? Who's this guy telling me no? Yeah, they don't know who I am. I am an independent individual. I make my own decisions. I do what I want. They don't have the power to tell me no. Okay. And then we go out and protest. Okay. Yeah. We not necessarily with placards and things, but whoever told us no, we protest to them. Okay. So the I that seems to have its own existence exists under its own power. It's solid. It seems that there is a real I that is being threatened or wants something very badly. Doesn't there? There's a real me, and I'm being threatened. Or there's a real me and I want that. And nothing is going to stop me from getting what I want. So this I is the apprehended and conceived object of the view of the personal identity. Okay? So this I is the object that the mind grasping, I and mine, grasps. You know? At this time, the view of a personal identity, which is a form of self-grasping ignorance, has arisen, and it grasps that independent I. Yeah. And it's grasping it strong. Yeah. And so either very strong attachment comes up, I want that, I must have it. Maybe very strong anger comes up, they're threatening me, I've got to defend myself. Okay? But it's all around that sense of an independent I. So it's at this point that the trouble begins, because based on this self-grasping, afflictions such as craving, belligerence, conceit, and so forth arise. Sometimes a virtuous mind arises supported by the view of the personal identity. For example, sometimes we have a very strong feeling of faith in the three jewels. And so then, at least in terms of the I, it's like, oh, I have such a strong feeling of really trusting the three jewels. So there's a strong feeling of I too, but, yeah, it's giving rise to a virtuous mental factor, not a non-virtuous one. Mm-hmm. Okay, so for example, we have faith in the three jewels, or we experience compassion for a homeless person. You know, we have a strong feeling of, wow, you know, horrible what that person is going through. In either case, polluted karma is created, and polluted meaning created under the influence of ignorance, and the ripening of the karmic seeds will perpetuate samsara. So even our virtuous actions as ordinary beings perpetuate samsara, but they do bring happy results, and on the basis of those fortunate results, then we can meet the Dharma, meet reliable teachers, learn, practice, and so on, and get ourselves out of this mess. Okay, however, the experience in samsara will be happy or suffering, depending on if the causal karma, you know, if we have a virtuous or non-virtuous mind, that, you know, along with that grasping at inherent existence. Okay. So, of course, we are nearing the time limit. Let me just, you know, because now I'm sure you're all sitting on the edge of your seat saying, well, tell us what inherent existence is after all that. Okay? So, Holiness says, what is inherently existent? We cannot define what it is because it doesn't exist. However, we can talk about what it would be like if it did exist. Okay? So if the boogeyman existed, how many legs does he have? Yeah. As we closely examine our own perceptions and thoughts, we'll gradually be able to identify how inherent existence appears to our mind and how ignorance grasps that appearance as true. So several ways of describing the object of negation follow. And so we'll talk about those briefly. Okay, so Chandrakirti says in his commentary to Aryadeva's 400, self is an essence of things that does not depend on others. It is an inherent nature. So something that does not depend on others, and it has its own nature. In other words, its nature does not depend on any other factors. Okay, it has its own nature that is self-existent, self-created. Okay, commenting on the statement that all phenomena are without their own power, that is, they cannot set themselves up, and therefore there is no self, then Chandrakirti pointed out 4 terms that were equivalent to the self that we're negating. Okay? So, first one is inherent existence. Yeah, or existing inherently. And so this is existence that's able to set itself up. Okay? Set itself up. It's just here. Doesn't depend on causes and conditions, doesn't depend on anything. It's here. Yeah. Do you ever feel that way about yourself? Yeah. I'm here. What do you want of me? I'm not created by causes and conditions. I'm just here. And nothing can destroy me. Because, yeah, you have that feeling? I'm here in this room. Nothing can make me not exist in this room. Yeah? I am here. Aren't you glad? Okay. Then Chandrakirti said the second one, existing essentially, existing inherently, okay, so having its own inherent nature, existing autonomously. So that means it exists under its own power. So it doesn't exist. Okay, a phenomena appears to its apprehending consciousness as not existing dependent on others. That is, not dependent on being merely posited by conceptuality. And it is taken to exist that way. A phenomena has a mode of abiding that is able to set itself up by its own entity, right with the object. Its nature has in essence its own unique mode of existence. Okay? So you could take any of those descriptive terms and just think of, how if something was like that, what does that look like when I'm perceiving something? Okay? So it appears to exist without being dependent on being merely designated by mind. Okay? So I look over, at Venerable Thubten, and she's there. Yeah, that's Venerable Thubten. I did not designate her as Venerable Thubten. Nobody else designated her that way. She just is that, And the same with my precious... my precious thermos. It is a thermos there. I did not call it thermos. It was a thermos, when it was made. The people who made it didn't make a tank. They made a thermos. And, nobody need to call it thermos. It is one. Okay? And plus, it's mine. So there's not only a truly existent thermos, not only a truly existent me, but there's mine that is also truly existent. So this is my thermos. I might lend it to you, but you cannot have it. Or even if I give it to you, there still remains a little bit of it being mine. Because if I ever lack a thermos, I might come and ask you for it back. There's still a little bit of mine inside of here. Okay. So it exists. This is what inherent existence means, without depending on another. And the another could be our designating it as that object, but it could also be its causes and conditions. When we look at things, when you look at the table right here, do you automatically see it as having parts and as coming together because there was wood that somebody then, they cut it down a tree and then they sanded the wood and then they built it? Do you see it as having causes and conditions? No. It's a table. Right there. Okay. When you see somebody, look around the room, see somebody, do you think of that person as being born from their mother? Do you feel like you're born from your mother? Well, you are, but do you feel, when you say I, do you feel like somebody who came out of her womb? No. I'm me. And I've been me the whole time. I don't depend on causes and conditions. So that this is how we see ourselves as independent, and we really hold that quite strongly, okay? And we see that I am I, okay? I am not merely designated I. I am I. So when you look at me and you say you're wrong, because I am I. And you are you. But you think you're I. Oh, you're you. But this is, we think I and other are just naturally existent that way. Nobody designated them. And this is what's coming up in chapter 8 of Shantideva. I am I. What are you talking about? Cherishing others more than self, or exchanging self and others. That's impossible. I am I, and very naturally, I am the most important one. That goes without question. Why is Shantideva asking why I think I'm more important than other sentient beings? That's obvious, because it's me. Okay, so this kind of ignorance of thinking that there's a person truly established from its own side, Okay, then, as a little cherry on the top, His Holiness talks about Ling Rinpoche. He says, my guru, Kyabje Ling Rinpoche, described the object of negation to be the basis of designation and the designated object appearing undifferentiatable. So the basis of designation, the parts, for example, or the attributes, the qualities of something, and that's the basis of designation. And the designated object is the object that we see there. Okay, so basis of designation of my precious thermos, you have a top. I can't really take it apart very well, but if you could, you would have the metal filler, you would have the outside thing, but it has a top, it has sides, it has a bottom. Basis of designation, we look at that and we say thermos. Okay? But we forget that we're the one that designated it thermos. And we think that it is now a thermos from its own side, radiating out, I am a thermos. This is what I am. Any idiot who comes in the room knows that I'm a thermos. Okay? Because there's thermos nature in here. Okay, so the basis of designation, the parts, and the designated object, the thermos, appear mixed, undifferentiatable. What a great word that is. Okay. In other words, the object of negation is the designated object mixed with the basis of designation or inside the basis of designation. In the case of the view of a personal identity, it is an I that seems independent but still mixed with the aggregates. Okay. That's kind of a contradictory thing. How can you be totally independent and mixed with the basis of designation? You can't be both. But this is part of why it's a wrong view. Yeah. Okay. The object of negation has also been described as what exists beyond what is merely designated by terms and concept. That is, the conventional object, for example, the I, just regular I, exists by being merely designated by concept and term. But ignorance grasps as existence something that goes beyond that. Okay? So something that we are superimposing on that basis of designation. An I that has its own mode of being, its own independent essence. Okay? So that's what we're examining to see if it exists. To find out how to examine it, read volume 8. But we have to stop now. Are you still on the edge of your seat wondering if you exist or not? You exist, but not in the way you think you exist. Okay, so we have time, maybe 1 or 2 questions?
Yes, I think Rashika has a question for you.
Of course. I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm super excited because I'm probably going to be wrong. But I just want to, so when you were talking about the thermos, you were saying when people look at the thermos, they're basically designated due to the aggregates, appearance and all that. But that is so it is the object that is designated due to its aggregates, but it's also the object to be negated. Like it's sorry, hold on.
No, that the object
that is what's being designated, right? The thermos is what's being designated.
Yes.
Is that right?
And the thermos exists. We're not
on a conventional level.
We're not negating the existence of the thermos. We're negating something that goes beyond it being merely designated. Something that appears to be inside of it so that everybody knows it's a thermos.
Okay. I think I'm sorry, I have a billion questions, but there's just one more thing. So I'm wondering, like, when you're talking about how negating what doesn't inherently exist, I'm thinking that it gives proof to the alternate. So like when I think about designation, I think, okay, if I'm inherently existing, then what is Rashika? Is it my mom's egg, the sperm, the food I ate? So by eliminating all those things by which I designate myself, because there's no Rashika in Rashika, that in turn shows that I'm merely designated and not inherently existing because I've identified the things that I am designated upon. Is that right?
Yeah, you are designated. Okay. That's how the I exists, as something that's merely designated, independence on Rashika's body and mind. Okay. But you're not your body and mind, and you're not separate from your body and mind. Okay. But so the object to be negated is something there in the body and mind that's also independent of the body and mind. Okay.
Okay. I'm sorry I didn't understand. I'm sorry. Okay. So I think I got it. Because like I was talking to someone, I'm like, okay, is there really Rashika? Because if in this life I'm Rashika and next life I'm Sean, well, who am I? Sean or Rashika?
What? I missed that. Slow down.
I'm sorry. Other people can go. It's fine.
Somebody want to? Yeah. What's it say?
Talking about perceiving inherent existence or true existence as if it's something like by itself.
Yeah.
And not attached to an object.
It's by itself, but it's mixed in with the object. You know how we say that the sum of the parts is bigger than the parts? Okay? You add all the parts together. There's something that appears from the mixture of the parts. Okay, that's just the conventional object. But instead of seeing that as just an appearance, depending on our imputing on the basis of the designation of the parts, we see it as something that is independent, existing mixed in with those parts.
I guess my question is more about, are we looking for an inherent existence itself to negate, or are we looking for an inherently existent I?
If you're meditating on the emptiness of the I, you're looking for an inherently existent I. Mm-hmm. If you're meditating on the emptiness of the book, you're looking for the emptiness of the book.
Mm-hmm. So it's always like in reference to an object.
Yes.
It's not just inherent existence itself. We must.
Yeah, because what are you going to point to as that's what Shankya was, like some amorphous thing out there that's called inherent existence. No. Okay. Okay, so let's dedicate.